welcome everybody. This is Maren and Tamara, and today we're talking about our relationship with ourselves and how important that is. And hopefully we're going to give you some really practical tips on how to start thinking about that and integrating that more and more into everyday life situations. So for me, in my private practice, I use your relationship with yourself as the main framework, as the context of our journey together. And for me, I believe this, that when we can develop a strong, authentic relationship with ourselves, that is the foundation for developing strong, authentic relationships with others and with God. So I'm going to invite Tamara to introduce herself and for her to start sharing how the relationship with yourself is integrated into her work.
Well, thank you so much, Maren. I'm so happy to be here and to be having this conversation with you. So,
Absolutely.
absolutely, I love everything that you just said. I feel like the relationship to ourselves is the bedrock and the foundation. So, I have a private practice as well, and my private practice really centers around a trauma and an attachment orientation. And so, when we think about our relationship with ourselves, I love to look at how maybe maladaptive things that we've been through, some challenging things we've been through, as well as suboptimal attachment patterns that, our parents do the best they can. But there's certain ways that people parent that may impact us. And so when we have this attachment and this trauma framework, we can really begin to look at this foundation of our relationship to ourselves and how that has been affected by these life experiences. A lot of times, things that can happen is that we really start to disown these parts of ourselves that aren't safe to express, that aren't adaptive. And we develop these adaptive child or defensive patterns that are beautiful. They help us survive and really get through challenging situations. But at the same time, when we become an adult, they may not lead us to be our best self, to be the person that we're really designed to be and to thrive.
Absolutely. I'm tracking with you and I really agree. And it's making me think of how when we're growing up as kids, those mirror neurons are
Absolutely.
so powerful. And basically, what that means is when we see our parents having an angry face, our mirror neurons in our brain as a kid go, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
I must be a bad person. They're angry at me. And this can often translate into thinking everything's my fault. I've heard so many people say, my parents got divorced when I was a kid, and I really thought it was my fault. And I think a big part of that is
Mhm.
even just looking at their faces, hearing their arguing. We translate that
Mhm.
as a child to go, this is about me, instead of recognizing that's actually about them.
Exactly. Yeah, mirror neurons are a powerful thing. And it
Mhm.
really begins to tap into this element of how we're wired at a neurobiological level and how our nervous system begins to develop these familiar patterns that we may not even be aware of, right? So it's really at this level of the subconscious.
Yes.
And I loved your episode with Simon. And if you guys haven't watched that, go back and watch episode 2, where they're really talking about cultivating empathy, because I really think there were so many gems in that in terms of, I like to think of them as like pathways into our subconscious, right? That we can begin to know what we don't know, what has just become normal because of these mirror neurons, because of the environment that we grew up in. And then we can begin to say and evaluate and feel out for ourselves. Does this work for me? Is this, and I love that word you used in the beginning, is this my authentic and true self?
Absolutely. It makes me think about a simple tip that you could start with right away if this is a new concept for you on developing a relationship with yourself is invite noticing.
Yes.
And right, to me, that's like the simplest thing where we do have these subconscious patterns or just automatic defaults in the way our brain is wired.
Mhm.
And they include distortions and, like you said, maladaptive ways to try to get our needs met. But if we can start noticing, what do I feel in this situation? Oh, what is the story in my head as I'm experiencing this? What is my internal reaction? Like, what's happening in my mind? What's happening in my body? And all of this is really powerful information that as we become more and more aware, we can use that to inform, how do I want to respond out here, instead of it just having be a reaction.
Exactly. And I love to use the word, and I think you guys use this in your episode as well, but noticing and bringing curiosity, right? I think curiosity is a beautiful way to alchemize shame. And there's so
Mhm.
much when we've been through challenging situations and we've done that internalization that you spoke of just a bit ago, Maren. There's a lot of deep shame. So to be able shame shuts us down, right? We can either go to either extreme of our nervous system where we numb. And there's a lot of things, especially in our culture here in the United States, there's a lot of ways we can numb in our world, right? Feelings are challenging. And if we haven't had any modeling on affect regulation, which is just a big term for being able to sit, being able to be with ourselves and our own feelings, which is a foundational element of that relationship with self. Um, we naturally are going to go to one extreme or the other, and that's numbing or this hyper arousal. And so to not check out, to begin to build our own internal capacity to really be with our emotions and curiosity, observing is that one of the foundational tiers that help us do that.
Tamara, I'd really like to hear more on how you invite clients into that, building that capacity. For me, when I think about shame, I think of some of our responses. You're talking about this biological and neurology response. I think of it in a relational way, which I think these two models like intersect. But I think about either we turn against someone, which is that fight response, that fight energy, or we turn away from ourselves or that other person, and that's that
Mm.
flee response, or we do people pleasing, which I think can be more of that freeze, like, oh, I gotta just make it okay as quick as possible. And what I hear you saying in my model is we could turn toward ourselves. We could turn toward the situation or the other person. And I agree with you. That takes practice and it takes building up our capacity to know how to do that. It's exciting because I think people can learn that skill. So,
Absolutely, people can learn that skill. And I think there is a longing in all of us
mm,
to reclaim this skill. This is inherent in our birthright to be able to have this deep and compassionate way of relating to ourselves, which is again the bedrock for what you do, especially with Simon and your relationship coaching, because that is the foundation for being able to have a healthy, reciprocal relationship with others. So in regards to your question, how do I particularly invite people to be able to build this capacity of sitting with emotions and
mm,
to alchemize shame? And
yes.
I think one of the first ways is really to just slow things down.
Mm,
So an activated nervous system is again that shutting down or that speeding up, but it's not a pace that can be digested by our nervous system.
mm,
Um, and it's also and I love that you brought in the tendon, I call it tendon befriend, people pleasing, because especially if we have a lot of women watching this video,
mm,
the initial research regarding the nervous system responses to danger were all done on men, right? So
mm,
as women, our adaptive patterns, our survival patterns do tend to be more relational. We are built and wired as women to be more relational.
mm,
So being aware of all the spectrums of how we sidestep, right? The pause of just feeling. And
mm,
because I really come from a strengths perspective and believing that everyone has this capacity,
mm,
it's just an invitation, the pause to start to access what's already within, right? To slow down the pace, to be able to start to digest these feelings that we think we cannot handle,
Yeah.
right? And so it's so powerful to not collude with that belief, to just take the pause. I am also a yoga psychology instructor, so I really love to incorporate breath work. Um, I also do heart math and QNRT and different modalities to help resolve trauma so your nervous system begins to rebalance and you don't have that much of a load to try to escape from or manage. So really it begins right there. The pause, beginning to notice, right? Going back to your words, to bring curiosity. And I think a second important, probably even more critical part is that I do my own work, right? And that my nervous system, those mirror neurons that they're feeling in that session is one of regulation, right? Our mother's eyes are our first mirror. That Winnicott quote is one of my favorites. And I think when we enter into a relationship, whether it's a therapeutic professional one, whether it's our marriages, our friendships, we really are attuned to each other at a very subconscious level, at all those nonverbals, right? So being able to really stay in integrity as a person is number one and foundational, because if I'm not safe, if the environment isn't safe, it's a very smart and adaptive pattern to continue to keep yourself. It's a boundary. This environment, I'm not choosing to share my heart, right? That's healthy. That's where we've had those protective strategies develop as a child because the environment wasn't safe. But if we can create, as practitioners, as individuals, a safe environment, right? We can help what was once a protector and now maybe has become a prisoner for them, right? These adaptive patterns that have become more of a prison that limits their authenticity. We can start to create a safe container where these patterns, these feelings can start to be transformed and we can heal those tender places.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm resonating with what you're saying so much, and you're even doing this with your hands, and you're saying a safe container, and right, like both Tamara and I want to show up for our clients, like holding this space in safety, in honor, in like you're saying, in us being regulated as best as we can. Now, I know that when I was learning this and practicing this right in the beginning, Tamara, it was really hard to hit that pause button. Like when we're used to that energy, that activated energy, that pause can feel scary. And at times it can feel like impossible, like, I don't know how to do this. And I think I'm even remembering when I was doing some brain spotting mentoring with a brain spotting certified person, her calm demeanor actually made me feel anxious because it was so out of the norm for my nervous system. So, do you have any practical ways where if the pause button is difficult for someone, what can they do in their relationship with themselves to practice stepping into that?
Yeah, there's so many things, pearls that you just dropped as well. But I do think it's a tricky balance and it depends on where someone's nervous system is because you shared that sometimes the pause button can be scary for people. And I would actually even expand that to say that sometimes feeling and feeling alive, especially for people who tend more towards the hypoarousal, the numbing tend to the spectrum. So whatever tends to dysregulate someone's nervous system, yeah, the question I think, if I'm getting it right, is how does someone develop that capacity if that container starts to activate the feelings of overwhelm, right? On either end of the spectrum. And I think one is just a framework, right? To begin to build this trust with your body.
Like
So
that.
Yeah. So that if you're feeling that, that is a rich source of information for you, right? To begin to see that as little breadcrumbs on your healing path towards reclamation and freedom. So that's the framework. And if in a relationship that's more challenging, usually typically it's less challenging, because we are social relational beings, and isolation can tend to, send us into a fear state. But if our trauma has been relational and we have this deep longing for that, it is going to start to bring up some of those protective barriers. So to begin to just give practical steps on how to, one of my favorites is one that's done on your own, and maybe you do this as well, but it's the mirror exercise. And it can sound a little corny when you first hear it, but I promise if you try this, you will feel something. And that's just looking at yourself in the mirror in the morning, not at your hair, not at your skin, not at anything but your eyes,
Oh.
and saying your name. So, Tamara, I love you, right? Like meeting your eyes and then repeating it. Our nervous system loves repetition. It's one that I recommend to almost everyone because it begins, we can tend to externalize things, right? And project, I don't feel safe, maybe when there is safety because of this person. But if it's just us in the mirror and we feel that same, like, ooh,
Mhm.
there's something there. There's something there. It begins to be a mirror, right, for a breadcrumb that maybe we want to explore. And I think another important piece is pacing, because if I or someone else am setting the pace versus empowering another person to set the pace, there is always choice, right? We can choose to begin to navigate this breadcrumb and where it's leading us, or you can have a very healthy boundary and say, I'm not quite ready for this exploration to go down there. Let's like put a pin in it, right? It's an important one. It feels like there's something of significance here. But right now, I don't want to explore it. And that begins to be a paradigm shift that also counters past trauma, where their pace wasn't honored, their no maybe wasn't honored, or maybe even their yes wasn't honored, right? Where they've had to fit into a box to live in a certain environment and dial down their light. So I think that's one practical skill and exercise I would encourage everyone to do. And then just a framework, part of the other building of the framework of the pacing and the choice, always choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like those two really practical ideas. It's making me think of what I mentioned earlier. Like, the more I can be aware here, I can have that information of what's going on in my internal world, the more that's going to inform my choices out here. And
Absolutely.
and I'm doing this with my hands, and it's like protecting me, protecting my integrity, protecting my peace. And when you were talking about boundaries, I often do this for myself and my clients, like, this is what we can control right here. And what are my choices within this circle? And what are my boundaries? And I think as you were talking, I thought of a very simple, practical tip is giving ourselves permission to make those choices, permission to set those boundaries. If we were never given that permission as a child, we might not even realize that's an option. But when we can give
Yes.
ourselves permission, it's like, oh, okay, that is within the circle of control for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Permission is huge again because it's starting an invitation for permission, right? Invitation for choice, begins to bring that subconscious to a little more conscious and makes us more aware of things that maybe we're not aware of, right? What we don't know, what we don't know. And if there's these habitual ways of being that may not serve us, but we don't know, what we don't know, then just even that field of you, and I, or whoever, beginning to discuss choice, beginning to discuss giving yourself permission, beginning to invite knowing. Sometimes we don't even know what our no or our yes is,
Yeah.
right? So beginning to invite that knowing and that deep attunement, right? Attachment is all about how our parental figure attuned to us. And as a baby, I love the attachment framework because subconscious isn't intellectual, it isn't cognitive, it's deeper. So when you think of that triune brain of the intellectual, the emotional, and the sensation, I like to think of a baby, right? And talking and explaining something intellectually to a baby, you like, honey, please stop crying. I have a test tomorrow or a big presentation. Like, the baby's going to be like, if
Right.
we soothe the baby, if we create safety and soothing, right, that is what brings the regulation, which is part of the container, which begins to create the field for permission and deeper knowing of our own, our own no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really powerful visual, especially as a mom, and being in those situations of, crying or frustration, like, I don't know how to help you, and not recognizing the soothing comes first and how that could impact our soothing as well. Uh,
Absolutely. And that's kind of how we're wired and built, right? The baby is not wired to learn to regulate herself first. They're wired, how we're built in our DNA and biology is that an external safe other
mm,
creates the container for us to regulate. And then we begin to develop that capacity within ourselves. So when people a lot of times say, you just need to figure that out, you feel safe, begin to feel calm. I really like to just contextualize it. We're wired for relationships first to model it, that those mirror neurons to come all the way back to that, right? And to begin to experience it in our body. And then the natural progression is to develop those skills on our own.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And there's so much interrelated. I think of like almost every situation in life intersects with what we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
I even think about this idea from studying Brene Brown's work of trust. And when we have those boundaries, and when we develop this strong relationship with ourselves, we increase our self trust. That's also a way of capacity to say, we have boundaries. We're going to start to trust ourselves more. We're going to be generous toward ourselves in terms of how we think about ourselves and how we acknowledge that we're valuable simply for being a human being. We're going to increase our trust. And as that self-trust increase, that also translates into being able to trust others and invite trust into the relationships. I think about in a simple concept that we are wounded in relationship and therefore we heal within relationship. And I hear you continuing to, in a sense, fill in that framework of it is about connection where we can have that healing experience and the rewiring of our brain, the reworking of our nervous system. So I resonate
Yes.
with that.
Yes. Well, I'm resonating right back because trust is the foundation, right? Trusting ourselves, right, is that container for ourselves to begin to add that healing process and that reclamation process of if we can't trust our own being, right, to be able to have and know our yeses and our nos and to honor them, which really ties back in with another element in your boost episode too with Simon about judgment, right? If we begin to discover, like create the pause, create the inquiry, have the container, and we discover a no, and then we judge that, right? That just shuts down this process. And so really beginning to invite that to loosen its grip on us and to invite inquiry into that is that judgment, making my light, my essence in this world brighter? Is it strengthening this mission that only I can live in this life or not? And then we have choice again, right? We have choice about how to uncouple that judgment and that shame voice so we can bring in trust for ourselves. Like that no may make no sense. That yes may make no sense. Why do I want to do that? Right? But that would be a tip that I would encourage people to begin to listen to is the tiniest no's, the tiniest yeses. Like I'm kind of interested in a dance class, honor that. Yeah, well, maybe go explore that. Or the tiniest no, like you don't need to understand it, right? In fact, our deepest wisdom is non-intellectual, right? So to begin to honor those little yeses and those little no's gives your body that sense of trust that maybe I can begin to give you, like any relationship, more deeper, profound truths and revelations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking something very similar. Like if this is a new idea for you, or you're just on this beginning journey of noticing, being curious, and saying those yes and no's, practice on really small things. And like you're saying, Tamara, like if you just even have an inkling, try it out. Do an experiment. It doesn't have to be right. And if you try it and you're like, oh, well, I didn't enjoy that, that doesn't mean it was wrong. It's like, oh, I'm just learning. I'm learning something new. I'm doing an experiment, and there isn't a right or wrong in the process. So think of little things in your life that you can practice with. I know when I was first learning this, my therapist was like, try sending your food back at a restaurant. It wasn't cooked the way that you asked, or the order didn't right. He's like, try sending it back. And I was like, I would never do that. And I'm like, but I could make that choice and practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to think of it as life is our mirror, right? Life is this beautiful mirror to reflect back. And if we're stuck in trauma or fear, we're not trying those things. So hold it light, hold it a little less tightly, right? Bring a little lightness to it. And I think that lightness comes with support, with safety, with trust.
So Tamara, as we're wrapping up, um, could you tell us a little bit more about the QNRT and tell us a little bit how what that experience is like and how that intersects with what we're talking about today?
So just a little bit about me and my background. I initially obtained my master's in counseling, and I worked with complex trauma and really found that a lot of what I'd been trained in was not effective with kids who had been through complex trauma, so developmental and, just these really intense things in their lives. So I pursued my doctorate in somatic psychology, which is about more about this wisdom of our innate intelligence, so our body and our sensate being, right? Our sensations, our feelings. We develop from that bottom up perspective and really honoring all levels. And this was transformational, not only in my work, but in my own personal life, to really be able to start to have a holistic framework to be able to transform these difficult experiences that people had been through. And along my path, I was certified in EMDR, heart math, and QNRT as well. And I think of all of these modalities, especially the QNRT, which is mainly what I do in my practice now, as being able to be an entryway point to the subconscious. So the access point to things that we don't know, and allowing our body to guide us to resolve these ways of being that aren't serving us anymore. So it's not about will, right? It's not about this willpower where we're pushing through and we're trying hard, but it's about all of a sudden something has just loosened its grip on us, and we can bring a little bit more ease to finding our best self.
Mm.
So a lot of my work, it also revolves around the yoga psychology. And I think the yoga offers somebody that felt sense experience, especially like circling back to what you were mentioning, if the relational component is fear inducing or is a little bit of a trigger. Because when you're on your mat, it's you and your experience. You're just being guided. And so it's an intentional and collective coming together for a pause and a field of other people that are tuning into this wisdom of our body and how we're made.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
that's also another component of it. And I think they really connect and intersect beautifully to create opportunities based on how individuals are wired uniquely, be able to choose which resonates with them the most.
As you're describing this, it's making me think once again about trust in those processes that you're talking about or those experiences. There is this trusting that you're bringing into that relationship and that experience for your clients of we can trust what your body's going to reveal and show us. And that connects with brain spotting as well, that I don't have to be the expert. The client doesn't have to have it all figured out consciously, but we go into an experience where we're allowing their body and their brain to guide us through subcortical clearing out and integration of those maladaptive things. And yes, I'm bringing a lot of trust that the client's system is going to guide us. And I believe God made us to heal. So we are wired to heal. It's setting that container that gives us the opportunity to say, okay, go ahead and do what you're designed to do in this safe space.
I'm feeling that.
Mhm, mhm.
Love that.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Their
So,
innate healing capacity.
yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, Tamara, it is time to wrap up. I am so thankful that we had this time together. Yeah, great discussion. I think this could have gone on for a couple more hours because there's a lot of things in my mind we didn't even get to touch on. I'm imagining that's true for you as well. But this has been so insightful and a delight to have this time together.
It has. Thank you so much. And I have enjoyed this conversation as well. So thank you so much.
Yep, sounds good. Bye, everyone.